Good evening, folks, and welcome to the final event of the 37th Annual Gender Studies Symposium. My name is Nick Hensel, and I am one of the co-chairs for this year's symposium. My heart is so full from the past 3 days of panels, workshops, and keynote presentations, and the overwhelming amount of thoughtful engagement and dialogue I've seen and been a part of throughout the symposium gives me a sense of hope that the important conversations we have had during the past couple of days will continue past tonight. Before I welcome tonight's keynote speaker, I have a few housekeeping items to go over. Please take a moment to silence your cell phone, and also, please live tweet during the presentation using our hashtag LCGenderSimp. Additionally, this year's symposium includes a fundraising effort for YWCA's Between the Lines initiative, which holds quarterly reading sessions at Coffee Creek Correctional Facility, where incarcerated mothers can record themselves reading a book for their children. For every participating mother, a volunteer sends a CD of the recording along with a new copy of the book for each child, helping to keep the mothers and the children connected through storytelling. By visiting the symposium information table in the council chamber lobby, or by taking out your phones now and sending a donation on Venmo to @LCGenderSS, you can help us purchase new books and shipping materials for their next reading on April 7th. Again, the Venmo is @LCGenderSS. In addition to helping out an amazing program, you'll be entered to win a 1-year subscription to the Feminist Sticker Club. Additionally, there will be time for questions and discussion after the presentation. Please raise your hand and wait for someone to come with you with a microphone. Even if you think your voice is loud enough for this room, I can assure you it's not. And we ask that you use the microphone so that all audience members can access this conversation. Tonight's keynote may include references to gender, racial, sexual, and many different kinds of violence. So please take care of yourselves and do what you need to do to feel most comfortable in this space. Finally, after tonight's keynote address, be sure to visit the bookstore's table right outside the council chamber, where you can browse and purchase some books by Leah and our other keynote speakers. I first encountered Leah Lakshmi Piepzna-Samarasinha's work one afternoon about a year and a half ago as I was casually strolling through AK Press's website, as one does when avoiding doing their homework, and came across The Revolution Starts at Home, Confronting Intimate Violence Within Activist Communities. Coincidentally, during this time, I'd been having many conversations with close friends about how so many perpetrators of sexual and gendered violence were some of the most visible and highly regarded community organizers in the Portland area. My one friend described to me being confronted by their abuser in the midst of a black bloc at a protest downtown, and how unsafe it made them feel, and how insecure it made them feel that someone who had done so much harm to them and so many others were on the front lines. After reading The Revolution Starts at Home, I felt a sense of relief that my friends and I were not alone in our struggles, and the hopelessness that I'd previously been consumed by began to wane a little bit. I began to feel like, yes, we actually can change this, and yes, we can and must hold our communities and ourselves accountable for the violence that has been done and the violence that continues to happen. When I was given the incredible opportunity of being a co-chair this year, I knew that we had to invite Leah. After 4 years of being part of this symposium, I feel that Leah's work embodies what this symposium is all about. She's an activist, poet, artist, performer, a fellow Taurus, a healer, and a dreamer. Her work forces us to reckon with the histories of violence that we have been complicit in, while also honoring the work our queer, trans, working class, poor, brown, and black disabled ancestors have done so that we could be here. She and her work are so dynamic because they actively center gender, queerness, transness, race, ethnicity, indigeneity, disability, illness, class struggles, ancestry, diasporic resilience, movement and coalition building, and most importantly, radical self-love. I am not going to front. Leah's work is very personal for me. Her conceptions and imaginations of queer femme identity have sustained me in times where I felt tired and angry. In a recent article she wrote for Bitch magazine titled, "A Modest Proposal for a Fair Trade Emotional Economy," she writes in depth about the care and labor queer femmes are expected to perform in this white capitalist, colonialist, cis-sexist, ableist patriarchy. She writes, "The thing is, the working class and poor femmes, the black and brown femmes, sick and disabled femmes, parenting femmes, and sex working and rural femmes, I know hold it the fuck down. We organize miracles, from complex political actions to the life support of making sure people are fed, don't die, and don't get evicted, on no sleep and low spoons and a quarter tank of gas." But Leah is not just an organizer. She has published 3 books of poetry, Body Map, Love Cake, and Consensual Genocide, all of which have received critical acclaim and nominations and awards, including winning the American Library Association Stonewall Award in 2016 and being an Audre Lorde Poetry Award finalist. Her memoir, Dirty River, A Queer Femme of Color Dreaming Her Way Home, that came out in 2016, is an American Library Association Rainbow List finalist and a Lambda Literary Award finalist. Her new book of essays, Care Work, Dreaming Disability Justice, is forthcoming in fall 2018 from Arsenal Pulp Press. Leah is currently a lead artist with the disability justice performance collective, Sins Invalid, where she teaches, performs, and lectures all over North America. Leah also co-founded and co-directed Mangoes with Chili, North America's longest-running queer and trans people of color performance art tour, and co-founded Toronto's Asian Arts Freedom School. I will conclude by saying this: Leah is fierce. She is one of the many unapologetic, queer, brown, ill femmes that we need to shut up and listen to in our fight for abolition and liberation. Her work is real. It is full of blood and guts and reminds us that we are all messy assemblages of past, present, and future moments hanging out in weird flesh suits. In the writing workshop that she led this afternoon, Leah said, "We get to have complicated relationships with our ancestors, and this goes for our lives too. We must demand that the revolution be kinky and queer and messy and pleasurable and sustainable, and we must never stop imagining." And with that, please help me in welcoming Leah Lakshmi Piepzna-Samarasinha.
Oh my God. Hi. Thank you so much, Nick, for that incredible introduction. And yeah, I could go home now. That sounded good. I don't know. I always am just like, I'm just this person who like farts and is weird, and I say that a lot. Thank you so much for coming out to this thing on a Friday night when you could have been doing something else, including staying home in bed, which is normally where I would be. That I am a Taurus, and that whole bio sounds really intense, but like there's a lot of Netflix in bed. I just really want to let you know that. I really want to thank all of the folks who did FEM and other labor to make this symposium happen. I want to thank Annie, Clelia, Nick, Paradise, Kim, who like is like incredibly like the most organized Scorpio I've ever met. You know, I'm just like, you know, and she's like, okay, I'm gonna do a turn-by-turn direction for how you can get to the dining hall. And I'm like, yeah, okay. I want to thank the ASL interpreters for making accessible space here. And all of the invisibilized folks who do AV, cleaning, who built this building, who do all the work that makes it so that we can be in this academic space where we're not supposed to be, right? I want to say I don't usually do this. Usually my notes are like 6 pages of like scrawled stuff and then I can't read it, but I wrote 10 single space pages of stuff, so God help you. But I did want to start by saying it means a lot to me to be asked to be in this space, specifically as a grassroots intellectual, someone who is a writer and thinker and working class femme of color with disabilities who, you know, kind of hustles the academy, but I'm not inside the academy. And that's not to say that there's anything wrong with being inside the academy, but for me, because of a lot of things, including ableism, I've made the choice for now to be somebody who comes in and out, but is outside of it, as a place that feels the most sustainable and powerful. And there's a lot of ways to do really good work to change the world, and this place is one of them, but this place is a really hard place to survive and not be really driven into a bad place. And it takes a lot of work, and it's amazing. It's not true for every women's and gender studies thing that you got a whole lot of working class intellectuals trying to take up space, you take out maximum student loans, not take out maximum student loans, and just actually make place for us to like really think and talk about stuff, you know, about this work of changing the world. So thank you. I learned a lot from watching Beth Ritchie, who spoke last night. It was really cool because she was like, I'm going to do 5 things. Here they are, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm going to do that. I want to start by just kind of talking a little bit about the lineage of my work and where I come from. I want to talk a lot about being a survivor organizer, a survivor of violence and abuse, who's part of a collective movement of intersectional feminists who are working to end violence and abuse without primarily relying on prisons, the police, the state, and children's aid, because those are systems that have failed so many of us, and they're built to fail. As promised in the title of my lecture, which I made up, Transformative Justice is not a magic unicorn, but it might still save your life. What was the subtitle? Some real talk knowledge about how the hell we do this. I probably didn't swear in it, but you know, get ready. I'm hoping to share some thoughts and some observations and some history and some stories about where I think we're at right now in 2018, at this really crucial moment where the shit is hitting the fan. Trump is the president. You know, we've had really crappy presidents before, but this is special. And we are right smack in the middle of like this particular time of trying to figure out, okay, how do we create systems that actually support survivors of violence and harm without locking up millions and millions of people, you know, and without actually being up in systems that actually, while saying that they support survivors, punish survivors and deport survivors and jail survivors. And I want to talk about storytelling as one way that we do that. And I want to really share complicated stories because I think that we don't deserve anything less than the full complexity of our stories. And I'm going to share a quote from one of my favorite writers, Dorothy Allison, who the folks who are in the writing workshop this afternoon, they already heard me say this, but so do people know Dorothy Allison as a writer? Some people? Okay, so if you don't, I shoplifted her first book from the Borders in Framingham, Mass. when I was 16, because my mom was there and I was like, she's not going to let me take this home. It's about our family. Her first book is called Bastard Out of Carolina. It's an autobiographical novel. Dorothy is the daughter of a 14-year-old single mom, waitress from Greensboro, South Carolina, an incest survivor, a queer femme, a radical, somebody who writes about working class women and femme lives, someone who writes about survivorhood. And I just stumbled on this piece that she wrote like 10 years ago, and this is a quote from it where she says, and it's really about being radicals at the end of the world, right? And trying to figure stuff out. Last week, because the river rose and we got cut off, we all watched TV. And it made me think, what the fuck is it gonna look like when they make the movie of our lives? Let me be clear about what I envision as the future of feminism. When they come around to make the movie of your life, when someone comes around to write the biography of you as that feminist icon or that revolutionary, world-changing activist that you are or about to become, for God's sake, make it more than something small or pretty or over-romanticized or simple. Make it as revolutionary as this tradition in which we speak has always been. Make it so dangerous that people will be scared and unnerved when they read it. Take risks. Make children out of wedlock. Get lots of lovers. Try some stuff. Make some difference. Without that courage, without that agitation, there will be no future of feminism and there will be no change. And it speaks to me on a lot of levels, but I really like how she's like, this is not something that you have to read in a fancy book that you need a dictionary to understand. Try some stuff. Tell the truth. Like, make some shit up out of what you know that you need. That is all that we have ever done in intersectional feminism and in survivorhood. Y'all still with me? Okay, sweet. Okay, So I'm going to do a little bit of lineage, and then I'm going to do a very long land acknowledgement, and then we're going to go into storytelling. So it's important for me to say that I'm here as the non-binary femme child of survivors who also caused harm, my parents. I'm here as the child of immigrants. I'm here as the daughter of my queer Sri Lankan dad, who was stateless and who married my mom, who's a working class Irish and Roma woman. And I'm here out of their queer relationship. It's important for me to say that I'm a Central Massachusetts poet and I'm a Rust Belt poet. And those are not words that you hear often enough, but guess what? They're still true. I am a survivor who's changing the survivor stories that I'm handed. I want to be part, and it's really important for me to not be, somebody was talking before about identity versus brand in the session that Kwoli and a bunch of people were in earlier. And to me, I'm really conscious of the space that I take up and the position that I have and the privilege I have as someone who's been able to somehow figure out how to write some books and get paid to talk and stuff. And especially as a light-skinned person, as a person who is not a chair user, who's more ambulatory, it's really important to name that. And what I want to say, especially in these days where a lot of times people are like, oh, so you've got to have a brand, you've got to have your Instagram, you've got to have all that stuff. I'm like, that's not the tradition that I'm coming from, and that's not the tradition that I want to help propagate. And I want people who are thinking right now in this room about how do I be a cultural worker, how do I be an activist, how do I be an organizer, that you don't have to brand your life. You can be a community accountable organizer. You can be a cultural worker or an organizer or an everyday person who is part of a constellation of stars, not just one. You can be part of a collective movement, and you can make enough to pay your bills, and you can figure it out. And that's really, really important because it is about all of us. And a couple other things I want to say. As a writer and a poet, a lot of times there's this question about so you're a poet and you're also an organizer. And one thing that came to me today that's also really important as a tradition and a lineage is that one thing that intersectional feminism has going for it is that we actually have this incredible tradition as poets, as leaders, right? And that's not, the President of the United States is not a poet, sorry, I'm not gonna do a lot of cheap shots because it's too easy, but, you think back to, the second wave, lots of feminists of color writers, June Jordan, Audre Lorde, Gloria Anzaldúa, Barbara Cameron, Christos, Sylvia Rivera, Miss Major, so many creative Black and brown femmes and women, and June Jordan, the radical Black queer feminist, she has this line I go back to over and over again where she says, you can't write lies and write good poetry. And she's like, and that's radical in poetry, and it's also radical, it's where we're coming from as intersectional feminists who are telling the truth. And I believe that more than one thing can be true at the same time. So there's a lot of truths out there, and they get to disagree, but that's still the place I'm coming from. And it's important for me that the revolution that starts at home, which is the project that myself, Chingy Chen, and Jai Dulani started 14 years ago, when people are like, how did you start that? I'm like, we started as Asian Pacific Islander queer poets who were survivors of violence. And I think that we probably would have done it if we weren't poets, but I think that being poets made us have a commitment to be like, we're gonna tell these truths, especially when people don't want us to talk about what we've survived. So those are some lineages. I also want to say really powerfully that, and I'll go back to this, that it is important for me to speak and not divest myself as a survivor of childhood sexual abuse and partner abuse and sexual assault in adult life. And I say it because survivorhood is normal. It shouldn't be normal, but this world teaches us that oh yeah, that's some rare sad thing that happens to a few sad people. Most people are survivors. And that is a really horrible truth, and it is also a source of power that we can leverage. Because when we realize that actually we are far from alone, that most of us are survivors, that's some strength in numbers. That's some big conversations that happen. And it's also very important for me to say that as survivors, we are so often taught that all we are is the wound. That we are not just the wound and the pain that we've been through, but that we never get to be experts on our own experience. There's this phrase I've been throwing around, the survivor industrial complex. And, yeah, there's some knowing laughter in the audience. And to me, it's a lot like what people call the nonprofit industrial complex, which is that big network of 501c3s and nonprofits that didn't exist before the 60s, and it literally was invented in the 60s because the government was really afraid of all these people's movements that were fucking shit up, and they were like, we've got to manage the sin. We got to give people jobs to manage the sin. And that's not to say it's wrong to be in the nonprofit world. Like, we all need to make a living somehow. We're all trying to make a living in this world, so any way we can. But the same way that those places sometimes have made it so that mass movements are smaller and people don't feel like, oh, I can just jump into the movement. I've got to go get a degree in the movement. Survivor industrial complex means that we can't just be survivors speaking our truths and having that be seen as real knowledge. There's all these masters of social work, no disrespect to masters of social work, but officials, professionals, people who had special training who study us as subjects. And one of the things I'm going to talk about a lot is what it means to bring a disability justice perspective as a disabled feminist to transformative justice. And this is one of those places because it is profoundly radical and profoundly against ableism to say that survivors are experts in their experience. Black South African disabled activists in the 70s came up with the phrase, nothing about us without us, right? And it's radical to say as disabled people, we know, and sick people and people with mental health stuff or madness or whatever you call it, and deaf people and neurodivergent people, we know more about us than those doctors who think that they know us. We always know more. When you're sick, all the other people with your chronic illness know more about it than whatever rheumatologist you see in 3 years, every time. There's profound implications for us as survivors when we actually say that the raw material of our lives is real knowledge. And that, I told a story earlier today in the writing workshop too about, it was only in this past year that my friend Blythe Barneau, who's a white working class harm reduction worker, survivor, and minister actually, who does a lot of work with opioid users who are the experts in ending the opioid crisis. Where she had this list where she's like, so these are skills that survivors have that make us good leaders. Empathy, flexibility, resourcefulness, ability to hold really wild stories. And I was like, this isn't, and she went on, and I was like, this is I'm 43 years old. This is literally the first time I've ever seen anywhere someone say, these are things survivors are good at. We're good as leaders. We have survival skills. We are the ones who are going to create the world that's after rape culture, right? Okay, lineage. So that is a nice segue into, I'm going to talk a little bit about the land that we're meeting on in this space because it's connected. So right now we're meeting in a city, Portland, that's on the traditional village sites of a lot of First Nations, right? A lot of Native nations. The Multnomah, the Katlamet, the Clackamas, bands of Chinook, Tualatin, Kapuya, Molala, and many other nations who made their homes along the Columbia River. And what I was taught as a young organizer in Toronto by Indigenous folks was that land acknowledgement is really powerful because it actually says, well, colonialism is kind of recent. And actually, the treaties aren't just some dusty things that we don't think about anymore. They're actually active law that's being actively disregarded to do things like dapple and poison water and steal land, right? And treaties are incredible pieces of Native diplomatic art to secure rights. And so normally I'm taught, if I was in Toronto, I'd say we're on land that's governed by the Dish with One Spoon Covenant and the Two-Row Wampum. However, in Portland, we're on a place where it's just genocide central. We're meeting on places where there's just incredible blatant disregard for treaty rights. And as historian, somebody that some of you might know, professor, historian, and comrade Walida Imarisha says, Oregon was founded as a, quote, white nationalist fantasy of creating a white utopia void of any people of color. Right? So we're living, we're right here meeting on land base that was governed by the black laws, where African American people were forbidden to come here, stay here, or buy land. And if they were here, they were punished by whipping or being forced out of the state. These laws were on the state constitution till 2001. Right? This is recent history. They were taken off because of the organizing of black organizers and community members to get them off. A lot of you probably know a lot more of this than I do, but I'm just going to do a brief overhead. We're meeting on land. There's immense histories of racialized violence and also immense resistance, right? So we're meeting on land where there was the race tax, where Black, Asian, and mixed race people were compelled to pay the state of Oregon $5 a year or do forced labor, right? We're meeting on land where there's been Japanese internment, Chinese lynching, terror of Hindus with 2 O's, which is what people call South Asian people here. We're meeting on incredible policies that reach into the 20th century, forcing First Nations people off land and into urban communities, right? This is the territory we meet on. And then the flip side of that, because where there's oppression is that there's always resistance. There's always the unforeseen consequences of oppression. So because of First Nations land grabs and tribal dissolution, you also have Portland as a city that has, it's like the 9th greatest number of indigenous people in any urban area in North America, right? Like this is a really big urban Indian city. This is a city where South Asians have been present since the early 20th century, and where the Ghadar Party, which was a revolutionary, all communities of South Asians movement that fought for the independence of India and South Asia from colonization through armed struggle, met in 1911 in Astoria, Oregon, in the Finnish Socialist Workers' Hall, right? This is a city of bracero resistance. This is a city where the Black Panther Party organized to feed kids and start the modern healing justice movement. This is a city where Black women especially have organized to start newspapers, schools, community organizations, neighborhoods, right? This is a sex working city. This is a city where queer and trans young people run away to be free, right? This is a queer and trans city. And I say this because this is the lineage that we are meeting to talk about how the hell do we end prisons, how the hell do we do transformative justice. And some of you may be being like, that's a really long land acknowledgement, and what the hell does this have to do with transformative justice? And, I would say it has everything to do with it. And I'm sharing these stories because what they say is that everything can be and has been different. And I may be embarrassing somebody who's in the front row for a minute, but my friend and comrade Quoli Driscoll, who's right there, hi Quoli, in her piece, Indigenous Sharks of Turtle Island Manifesto, which she wrote some years ago, said, we know that the United States and Canada are just some things happening to us right now. They're a period of history, not places not places that will be here forever. We were here before, we're here now, we'll be here after they're over. When you look at the Black laws, at the Black codes, at exclusion acts, those things started in 1865. That's 150 years and change. And that can feel really long, and it is. And it's also just a drop in the middle of the vast expanse of history. Colonization's not gonna be around forever. The prison industrial complex and our current terrible society's ways of dealing with violence and abuse, this is something that's here for a blink of an eye, and it's been different, and we can dream something different if we're rooted in the real histories where we are. I have a whole laundry list where I'm just like racism, whorephobia, ableism, sexism, children protective services, foster care, juvie, jails, and mass incarceration didn't always exist, right? And I say this because when we are doing this, really, really, totally not an ambitious project of, of replacing carceral feminism and carceral systems with something else, it is real easy to get super overwhelmed, And I am a very hardworking Taurus, and I'm on the Aries cusp, just to bring astrology into it, because we need a little light astrology to talk about this now. But I just was like, I've had periods where I'm like, oh yeah, when Revolution Starts at Home came out as a book in 2011, I was just like, oh yeah, in 5 years, the prisons are gonna be gone, and we're gonna have these people's community healing councils everywhere, and survivors will just have totally gotten a lot of peace, and it's gonna be so cool, and that did not happen the way I thought it would. And I need to remind myself of this too, especially as somebody who's a young middle-aged person who, it's real easy to get real tired of this shit at any point, but I'm just I've been doing this for 20 plus years. I'm starting to get real tired. I really just want oppression to be over so we can just chill. Can we just chill? That would be really, really great. So speaking of how we do this transformations, that's the land base that we're on, that's the lineage that we're on, and now I'm gonna talk about the how have we done transformative justice? What are some stories? How are we doing it? How could we do it? And so I'm gonna start by a brief definition because there's a lot of word salad out there and academia is weird. To me, transformative justice is just a fancy way of saying any way of creating more safety, justice, and healing by and for survivors of abuse or violence that doesn't primarily rely on calling the cops or sending someone to prison. And it was it is that way not just because someone thought, oh yeah, theoretically prisons are bad, they're yucky, like I want to do something else. This is a movement that was invented by survivors of violence, predominantly Black, brown, poor, working class, queer, trans, disabled survivors of violence who were like, when I call 911 when my partner's beating me, I get arrested. Or I can't call 911 because I will be deported. Or I can't call 911 because I'm a sex worker and because of the way I make my living is criminalized. Or I really want my partner to stop being abusive, but I don't actually want them to go to jail because I don't think it's going to help. They're going to be more mad when they get out. They're actually going to be more traumatized when they get out. They're a survivor too. I want something else. Or also for those of us who are like, I have caused harm to somebody. I have traumatized somebody, and I want to figure out how to make it right. It's invented because of the fact that mass incarceration, the prison nation that Beth Ritchie talked about last night, prisons have been here for a minute, but the kind of mass incarceration that we're seeing really wasn't there until the last 20 to 30 years, and it's growing every year. And we're all coming from a place where we don't want more of our communities locked up, and we don't want more of our communities locked up with no visiting, no exercise, no commissary, no college, no health care. We don't want to necessarily send people to a prison camp as the one way that we try and heal things. We want something else. So this is very important. So the origin story of Revolution Starts at Home was I was pissed off at my day job. And this is 2004, so I had dial-up at home and I had fast internet at work. So I spent a lot of time, being like, oh my God, the internet's so fast. Wow, I can talk to all these people. Oh my God, Friendster. I'm dating myself. This is very exciting. And I had survived a relationship that was incredibly beautiful in a lot of ways. It's somebody else who was brown, queer, working class, a survivor, a revolutionary, someone who was down to take down the cops, and who then became abusive and in 1997, and who no one in our community knew what to do. And this is someone who had already done time and who was also my immigration sponsor because I was in Canada, and who was like, okay, if you call the cops, some really bad things are gonna happen. And as a 22-year-old, I had to figure out how to survive that on my own with very little roadmaps. And I know I'm not the only one, and I'm really not special in all ways. I mean, I really feel like most people in here have survived some really complicated circumstance where you just had to figure some stuff out. The short version of that long story is that I survived. I got away. My partner did not and has still not taken accountability for harming me and other partners in his life. And then we're all in this political community that's just we don't know what to do. And there I am in 2004, looking at my email, and it shows me that he's DJing at this IWD event, actually. And and then I'm just like, motherfucker. And literally, and not literally, and that would have been really bad. And I just hit up two of my friends, and I was just like, I was on LiveJournal, and I was like, I am so mad. This is the best case scenario. I'm not dead. I did not have to leave my country, the country that I'd chosen. And yet I still feel like if I directly confront this person, it's gonna come back on me, and I can't call the cops, and I don't know what to do. And Chingy and Delani both had their own experiences of surviving abuse within a community that was supposed to be activist and progressive and socially just. And we just really casually why don't we make a little zine? Why don't we, maybe we're not alone. Let's collect some stories. Yeah, let's put it out on the internet, this new internet thing. And, and it was at a time that was really important in feminism of color, where Insight, Women of Color Against Violence, was 4 years old, and was a coalition of Black, Indigenous, and POC, people of color feminists, who were like, hey, this whole bringing the cops into the domestic violence shelter is not working for a lot of us. What have our communities done to survive? What's our big vision? What do we want instead? And they had a lot of these documents that you could tell are just 6 really tired people in a hotel room with some flip chart paper being like, okay, let's brainstorm. What can we do? Go. And they had these documents up there that were here's all the ways we could think of intervening in violence from a community-based perspective, right? When calling the police is not an option, or you don't want it to be an option. And I remember me and Chingy and Delani just looked at those, and we were like, this looks really good in theory. We wonder how people are doing it in practice. And we were just like, okay, let's look for the stories. And as some of you may experience, when you're a little bit out as being a survivor of something, people find you and they're like, oh, I hear you went through that too. Don't tell anyone, but I'm gonna tell you my story about that famous person who everyone really likes, who's really charismatic. And so we had some of that survivor networking, which often is denigrated as gossip, but I feel like in Latin, gossip comes from some root that's like the violent tongues of women, and they're not wrong. And those tongues are really powerful, and those tongues keep people alive. So we collected these stories, and we were like, we're our own experts, and we're not asking for any credentials, and we were really specifically about, tell us what worked and also tell us what you tried that really failed. And that's the work. That is the work. I feel like that continues to be the work. And we made a zine. It ended up being 108 pages. It was really hard to steal all those copies at Office Max. You know, like really hard. And then after a while, I was like, I think they're on to me. I don't know. We need to get some money from somewhere. And then people were like, okay, like this South End Press, which is a feminist of color press, reached out to us and was like, do you want to expand it to a book? So I'm saying this to give some history because histories are erased, and I'm also really, the real reason I'm sharing this is because I want to say, there was somebody in the audience last night who was asking, you know, how do I plug into spaces that are alternative spaces, that are transformative justice spaces or restorative justice spaces, to Beth. And, you know, Beth named Project Nia and a couple of other projects, and that's really real. And what I also want to say is that this entire movement has been 3 people at kitchen tables being like, we got to figure something out. And I really want to say there are existing organizations and projects and people out there, and I really want everyone in here to know that it's not about being an expert or having an advanced degree. It's about really being honest and being like, what do we need? What would justice look like for us? What are things that we can do? What's the power that we have? And that everybody in this room can learn how to do that, and is already doing that. So I'm going to call some organizations in this space that a lot of people may not have heard of or remember. I want to call into the groups that are early Black and brown feminist groups in the 2000s that are hard to find now because Web 3.0 erased Web 1.0. And also, a lot of us were coming from security culture where we were like, we don't want everything to be on the internet. This is pre-Alexa, like the idea that like everyone just knows everything. We were like, no, we got to keep this locked up. I want to call groups in the room like Sista to Sista, which is like a Black and Boricua and Latina organization of like going down the like young women and gender nonconforming people as young as 12, trying to organize. And yeah, I went to Color of Violence too, which is a conference, and there was this young person up there who was like, well, you know, I'm 15, I'm not really a youth anymore, so I can't really speak to that experience. And I was like, no, but I also was like, that is incredibly powerful because young people who are survivors, who are still surviving shit, are left out of our movements because of the professionalization of stuff where you have 13-year-olds calling a rape crisis center and they go, oh shit, sorry honey, if you keep talking, I've got to call CPS. And do you want to go to foster care? You probably don't, because that's what mandatory reporting does. It's complicated. You know, a lot of things that start with really good intentions become very complicated. Sister to Sister was like, what do we do if we declare Bushwick, Brooklyn, a harm-free zone in terms of violence against young women and girls of color? What does it mean if we do that? What does it mean if we just like hang out, if we like wheat paste and do graffiti and like train people in self-defense and hang out on our stoops and talk to our neighbors about what do we do when we hear some violence going on? How do we intervene? How do we de-escalate? How do we learn these skills? You know, I want to call the Safe Outside the System Collective, another Brooklyn-based collective, started after the brutal murders of 3 Black queer men after hooking up in clubs, where, you know, Audre Lorde Project, which is a community center that still exists of LGBT folks of color, were like, okay, most of our people don't call the police, and when we do, the police don't show up, so what can we do instead? And my comrade, Jairus Dixon, and many other people were like, okay, so who already knows how to intervene in violence without the cops? Bodega owners, bar owners, who has a baseball bat behind the counter when someone comes in and says, give me all your money, right? People who are in neighborhoods where the cops don't come have learned how to talk people down, cool things out, things like that. Safe Outside the System went around and went to cafes, bodegas, bars, and were like, will you commit, and talk to people and build relationships, and it took a while, because this work takes a while, and we're like, will you commit to making this be a space where you intervene if somebody queer or trans is fleeing violence? And they said yes, and that changed, that built on the strengths that were already there that aren't recognized because they're working class skills, right? And they're not officialized skills. And Jairus has this great story where she's like, yeah, you know, I went to this bodega and the owner was like, hey, Mrs. Jairus, I safe spaced the other day, but I don't know if I did it the right way because it wasn't a gay person. It was a woman who was like fleeing her boyfriend. Did I do okay? And then Jairus was like, yeah, because when stuff's safe for queer people, it's safer for everybody, right? Those skills are transferable and they spread out. I could go on and on about like the different groups that are in there. I also want to really name, as an ally of my sex working friends and comrades, the many ways that sex workers are in the vanguard of creating safety without the police, because you can't call the cops if you're a sex worker. My friend Chanel Gallant talks about bad date lists, which are lists that sex workers use to be like, okay, that's a client who's not good, don't work with him, as ways that sex workers have protected themselves for decades. I think about people like Miss Major, who was president at Stonewall, Black trans woman warrior, founder of the Trans and Gender Nonconforming People in Prison Project, who in Revolution Starts at Home, when we interviewed her, and we were like, so back in the day when you were a street sex worker as a Black trans woman, how did the people who are in your community defend themselves? And she was like, well, you know, if anyone came and messed with us, it was like all of us against that one violent homophobic person, violent transphobic person. And sometimes we sweet talked them, sometimes we distracted them, sometimes we fought back physically, you know? And she's like, yeah, you know, me and the girls, we used to take a brick and paint it so it matched our purses, because she was like, you gotta be cute. And we would use, and there's a real beautiful and important way that femme and trans femme people, we resist through beauty and aesthetic. You know, they don't call it femme armor for nothing. That's actually really real. I think about those traditions. I think about all of those kinds of things. And I really want to say that there's a huge, huge, huge unspoken archive of wild stories and explorations into creating a world without prisons that a lot of brilliant, tired Black and brown femmes usually, you know, sometimes talk about over some tea or a beer late at night. And I really hope that we keep recording that history, because that's also part of the work of movement building, that we get to record the history that we're making. So this is some storytelling, and this is some history, and right now we are at this incredible moment where Trump's in office. A lot of people are really scared about what the future's gonna hold. There's like earthquakes, climate change, hurricanes, like mass shootings, like you name it. Like really, it's like, do I go to Mars? I don't wanna go to Mars. I have no money to go to Mars. You know, Mars would be messed up too. And it's this interesting moment where, like, you know, 20 years ago, when I was a young abolitionist, and I would say, yeah, I know, I'm a prison abolitionist, people would be like, what? You know, 3 people would be like, oh, that sounds like a good idea, and everyone else is like, you're insane, what are you talking about? And I think now we're at a moment where you still have a lot of people who are like, what the hell are you talking about? For, you know, a mix of really good reasons, you know, mostly that we are still fleshing out what the alternatives are. But I would say that this is the 5th year anniversary of Black Lives Matter being invented as a movement. We've got generations of Black, Indigenous, people of color, poor folks, you know, feminist movement before that. And, you know, like 20 years of modern prison abolition and a lot of mass incarceration. And so 2 years ago, Rolling Stone had this article called Policing's a Dirty Job. Turns out no one has to do it. Here's 12 alternatives. And I'm like, that's real different. A lot more people read Rolling Stone than my little zine I worked on 20 years ago. This is interesting. There are a lot of people who, especially in the ways in which, as movements and communities, were witnessing in a different way violence against Black and brown people, right? Where it's like on Facebook immediately, you know, and it's not like this is new, but like the ways in which we're all connecting around it may be new. I see a lot more people who are like, okay, yes, I'm ready to do something else. And I also see a lot of people who are like, I know I'm not supposed to call the police, but I am not sure what else to do. And this is the moment that we're in to try and figure out for real what we do. And I will say that I have heard some people, including people I really care about, give what I think are very simplistic, kind of rainbows and butterflies descriptions of transformative justice. You may have heard this too, I see some nodding, where they're like, yeah, you know, it's really wonderful. It's this wonderful way where when something bad happens, you know, like you don't put anyone in prison or punish them, like you just work with them to transform the rapist, and also to transform the conditions that gave birth to the violence. And that's not wrong, I believe in that. I will say there are a lot of people who they hear that and I go, that sounds really cute. My boyfriend, my ex is calling me 17 times in the middle of the night and showing up outside my house. What the hell do I do there that's transformative justice? I don't really want to call 911, but like really tell me something real that I can do instead. Tell me something that makes sense. And I think that is absolutely valid. And I want to say that it's really important for me, like sometimes I've given talks and people are like, so you're saying that if people call 911, they're bad. And I'm like, no, I think that we do whatever we have to do to survive, and usually we use tools that are really faulty, right? I also think that we deserve a more real, this is the more real and complicated story of transformative justice that I was talking about before that I think that we deserve to talk about. And, you know, some of the stories that I can think of are like, yeah, so what happens if somebody harms somebody who's close to me and I'm like, okay, cool, I'll do something. Me and my 3 friends who are working 3 jobs, then we try and do something and get real triggered. And then the person who caused harm like says, oh yeah, totally, yeah, I'm gonna do everything. And then does some completely batshit stuff. And then somebody does something else, and then it's finals, and then there's a blizzard, and then I get pneumonia, and then really I'd rather watch TV. And it's at that moment where like this whole replacing person stuff is just like, well, I don't know, I guess we just kind of wait for the next generation to figure it out. And so I do have some answers. They are not the answer, but they are hopefully some important pieces of information, and then we're gonna open it up to conversation and dialogue. And cool, I've been talking, it's 5 to 8 already. Okay, y'all still here? More or less, great, okay. So, a lot of people ask me all the time, so, okay, how do you do TJ? You know, what are the 6 steps? Here's the 6, it's like, you know, it's like the 6 steps to whatever, you know, like flip your house in like 10 minutes or less for $5, like things like that. And then people get very, and like people, they're like, I just want to know 6 things I can do that absolutely will work, you know? And I'm just like, well, they don't exist. The only thing that really exists is what does the survivor need to have healing and justice? And that is one hell of a question, and is a question that within the criminal legal system, no survivor is ever asked. And I could quote you statistics you probably know about how like, it's like less than 0.4% of sexual assaults that are reported go to court, and then something like 1/10 of 1% of those get prosecuted. And so there's all that. There's all the people who are like, I'm not even gonna report to begin with because why put myself through all the hell I'm gonna go through? It's not gonna get me anywhere. Or who, I got a restraining order, it kind of helped, it kind of hurt, I don't know. But nowhere in any of the systems do we as survivors get asked, so what would you need to feel done? You know, like what's your vision? Like what do you need? And often when I've been like working with folks trying to do different interventions or make a plan for somebody, or when I've asked myself that question, I've just kind of hit this big wall of like, wow, it's a really great question. I'm gonna sit with that for a while. I don't know. It's really big to think about. And it's still a question that I think that as a movement we need to keep asking ourselves, like what is healing, justice, and safety for us as survivors? And the thing that's fascinating is that the answer usually changes, right? The answer keeps changing. The answer is complicated. And this is gonna go a little sideways, but it's related, I swear. So these are some controversial thoughts. So that whole transformative justice thing I said, the kind of classic simple definition of like, yeah, no, it's when everybody transforms and the person who abused totally transforms and is never gonna do it again and totally gets it, and the conditions that made them do it in the first place change. I was thinking about this recently and I was like, that is a really good long-term goal. And I'm like, God, for myself as somebody was a kid who survived childhood sexual abuse, I'm like, that sounds a lot like what I've wanted for my parents my whole life. You know, I wanted my parents to be like, hey, you're not crazy. That happened. We're sorry. You know, here's like $50 for the therapy bills or something. You know, like something like that. And my parents are not gonna do this. And most survivors I know, you know, of anything, are people who caused harm are not, it really takes a lot to make people be like, okay, yes, I'm gonna admit that I did it. You know, because there's so many reasons why it's a lot safer to be like, nope, you're crazy. I didn't do anything. And so where that leaves us as transformative justice workers is often a lot of people I know who are trying to do this, that happens, that like denial, and they're just like, we're just stuck. You know, the person who caused harm is just saying, nope, you're crazy, that didn't happen. We're just stuck waiting for them to admit it and change. We feel so powerless. This isn't working. It's a real all or nothing way of approaching it. And I'm not saying that we should give up on the total transformation plan, but I also think that perfection is an idea that's rooted in ableism, right? So let's like, you know, cripple this idea a little bit, because like ableism says there's one perfect way to have a real able-bodied, skinny body and mind, and everything else is broken. And you better to like lose weight, get a surgery, get some genetic treating, keep up, be the kind of disabled person who can run a marathon, and other than that, your life's not really worth living. And what disability justice folks say is that actually there's no one right or wrong way to have a body, that we all, disabled people, have always been around, and that we didn't used to be looked down upon. We just had different bodies and minds. Wild, I know. And you know that actually perfection's a trap. So I started thinking, if we crip the idea of transformative justice, what does it mean if we count anything that is positive as a win? And so last year was 20 years since some really major incidents of abuse in that relationship happened to me. And, and my best friend of 20 years ran into my ex and was like, oh yeah, he's still in denial. It's really wild. He started crying all over me, and it wasn't so good. And I was like, for a lot of my life surviving that relationship, I have thought, wow, he still doesn't get it, and it's been 20 years, and he's had access to a lot of people trying to call him out. That is a story that obviously I have a lot of really depressing feelings about and that I don't feel good about. And so we could look at my whole story and count it as like a loss, not a victory. Or we could tell a different story where, for years, my best friends, my little also immigrant queer girl of color group of friends, every weekend when we went out, they would walk into every event we went to, they would scan the whole space, they would see if he was there, and either they would intimidate the hell out of him until he left, or if he didn't leave, we'd go someplace else. We can count that as a win. When I think back to as a really under-resourced survivor, brown femme, where I literally did witchcraft and I smeared menstrual blood and salt around my doors and windows in a protection spell, and indeed, my partner did not break into my house. That is a win. We can look at the fact that when my ex-partner stayed in really charismatic denial, the way a lot of abusers do, I walked away from that, and then I was like, okay, I'm gonna start talking to other survivors and building a whole collective movement and dream this whole future world where we do something else. That's a win. Me being a messy, complicated person who's thriving is a win. These are all different ways of looking at the transformation of myself and our communities that don't rely on some jerk, deciding yes or no, oh, I really hit you or not, It's about building power where we have power, right? So I want to count that as a win, and then some other things I want to talk about real quick, and I'm just worried. I'm like, damn, it's already 8 o'clock, and I'm worried about everyone's attention span. But I want to really bring the genius of disability and disabled folks into this work, which may seem kind of like a wild idea to some people, because I will say as a disabled organizer, one of the many wild ideas to a lot of people is the idea that as disabled folks, we have skills, strategies, and intelligence, that we're good at stuff. People are just like, I'm sorry, say it again, what? I'm still trying to be, I don't call you handicapped, I'm very confused. Yeah, so I think that disability justice has a lot to teach transformative justice and to strengthen it. I'm gonna tell a couple stories. So recently I was I'm still in a 2-year process of dealing with a situation where 2 people in my community, one person sexually assaulted the other. And everybody involved in this, the survivor, the person who sexually assaulted, the people who were holding the person who assaulted accountable, the people who were supporting the survivor, we were all chronically ill or disabled. And because of this, we moved on what some people call crip time, it's like we're all real slow and we're all real sick, and oh, I'm sorry I can't make it because the accessoride didn't show up and I threw up, and the usual. And there were times where different ones of us were very apologetic, I'm sorry this is taking so long. I'm sorry, this is, but the thing was, this is a process where actually the person who caused harm broke out of their denial and was like, nope, you're right, I did it. I'm gonna do all the things the survivor asked for. Thank you, and then did it. And I was just like, this is a goddamn miracle. And it really made me think, the able-bodied world, mainstream world, everything's supposed to be fast, 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 keep up, do it in 2 weeks, go, 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 go. And it leaves behind all of us who can't keep up that speed because we're elders, we're parents, we're sick, we're disabled, we're whatever. We don't fit into that world. And one of the gifts of disability is, and it's not always a gift that a lot of us are happy about getting when we first get it, but it is the gift of slowness often, where we're like, okay, what does life look like when I'm moving at this pace? What does life look like when I'm slow? And I think a lot about transformative justice and how, in that case, the way that transformation was able to happen was that we didn't, point something at somebody's head and go, you got to change in 2 weeks. It actually was slow enough that the person was like, oh, wow, I really didn't think I hurt somebody. I really thought I had consent. I really didn't. I really caused harm. Holy shit, I really need to look at this. And these folks are actually offering me an opportunity to stay in community, if I can admit it, repair the harm, do what the survivor's asking for, and come back, right? So that's the gift of slowness, and that's what actually keeps it in a sustainable pace. And I think that every transformative justice process I've been in, there's a moment where everything goes not according to plan. And often we're just like, wait, no, I failed. Why isn't this just working? Let's make it work. And that is understandable. And those are also the moments where, when we're able to stop and breathe in to where it's fucked up, there's often some kind of knowledge, some kind of lesson, some kind of, we didn't look at that yet and we need to, that's waiting there, right? And that's kind of like the joys of like cripping, this process. And then like on a real macro scale, Eli Clare is like a white trans disabled writer and organizer, and he has this thing that he wrote 20 years ago now in his first book, Exile and Pride, where he was like talking about how disability rights in the 70s, right? Very important movement, very single issue movement, often like very white, cis guy dominated, like very much focused on only a certain kind of disability, trying to get legal rights, not really working with other movements. And he was like, what would it have been like if in 1970, or 1975, say, the disability rights movement had met up with the prison justice movement and been like, because the disability rights movement was and is fighting against disabled people being locked up in institutions and mental health wards and, being forcibly committed, and being like, we want to be out of the nursing home. We want to be in our communities. We want to be able to live. What if we linked up that kind of caging with the prison caging of putting people in cages, and our movements could have combined? Like what would that have looked like for both of those movements? That would have been really powerful, right? Like there would have been so much like power in numbers and complexity. The interesting thing when it comes to TJ is that kind of happened in Toronto in the 90s, because we had what we call the psychiatric survivor movement, which is a movement of people who'd been labeled as mentally ill, some of whom had been forcibly treated, some of whom hadn't. And we worked with prison justice movements, and we did not end policing in prisons and, psych wards, but we did do an incredible amount of organizing to push back on laws like forcible treatment laws, where you get forced to have electroshock, where we were able to intervene where, for example, in the prison for women, which was an all-women's prison in Ontario, where there's a rash of suicides of mostly Native women prisoners, there was so much organizing around peer counseling and support and suicide intervention and mental health and trauma within prisons, especially for women, especially for Indigenous women, that we were able to share all those skills, right? And then I think about that cross-pollination when it comes to TJ, where it's like, where do we bring those disabled skills of slowness, of pleasure, and this is like, and also sustainability, because Beth said something last night where she was like, someone was like, how do you sustain yourself? How do you keep yourself going? And she was like, well, I just remember that Sweet Honey in the Rock song with the line, we who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. And I love that, but as a disabled feminist, I want to push back on it. As a disabled Sri Lankan feminist, I want to say, we who believe in freedom need to fucking rest sometimes also if we're going to be here when it comes, right? And it's both and. I think that there's incredible pleasure and joy in fighting for freedom and pushing for it. And I think that, as a midlife disabled feminist who wants to live to get old, and as somebody who's been doing TJ work in different ways for 20 years, I think there's incredible power in bringing a disabled and chronically ill wisdom to this work, right? And I'm going to say what I mean by that. So like, we got all this like, go, 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 got to fix it, got to do it. That leads to a lot of people dying in their 40s and 50s, because for a lot of reasons, because of like, don't stop, can't stop, which is not great for movements or communities. Like I want everyone to live as long as possible. And there's also something about sick and disabled time where mainstream world just always is, rewarding, you made a product happen, you did it, you're going to 18 meetings a week, you got 3 jobs, you go, 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 go. And it doesn't reward like the sick time of like, I'm in bed, I'm still in bed, I'm still in bed. And I think of it as seasons, and I think of that, I think of a metaphor of like the times where I am sick and slow in bed as like being like wintertime, where it's a time of fallowness, it's a time of rest, and it may not look like a lot's happening, but a lot of shit's happening underground. And for me, as somebody who's been doing transformative justice movement stuff for 20 years, I find incredible richness in those times where, and often, I'm going to be real, like I didn't want to take time off. I kind of got pushed because it was just like, I've had to hear a lot of really intense stories and I just can't. Where I was able to really, in those periods of downtime, be like, oh, I'm figuring this thing out, I'm figuring that thing out. There's this thing that's coming to me that wouldn't have happened if I was running. And I think that especially one way of bringing disability into our movements is, I don't want our knowledge to get lost, and I don't want our people to get lost. And that means that we deserve sabbaticals, and especially I had another talking point, which is this movement cannot depend on an expectation of unending, unpaid, femme of color, working class labor. And part of sustaining the movements is making sure that we get to have breaks and we get to have time off, and that, it's not just like the 20 black and brown femmes who know how to do this stuff, and if they step away, everything falls apart, but that movement gets to spread out, that knowledge gets to spread out. It's not just all on like 3 people to be able to keep it going, but we get to train everybody. We need to build out to scale. And this is gonna sound real radical, and I don't even know if I believe in it all the way. One thing I want us to bring to this movement is actually pleasure. And that's a disability justice thing. The people I know who love pleasure the most are disabled folks. Because it's really, and it's not easy all the time or simple, but the disabled femmes of color in my life are the ones who just curate pleasure in our lives. Because when you're told that your body mind is undesirable and that you're not gonna live past 40 and that you don't have a life worth living, one of the places that we resist sometimes is to actively and passionately fight for pleasure and joy in our lives. As an act of resistance to the people who are like, well, you just deserve a nursing home, you just deserve a crumb, like you just deserve bare tolerance. It is really, and I'm not talking about pleasure as necessarily sexuality, because a lot of us are asexual or have wildly different disabled sexualities, but I'm talking about bringing pleasure into our movements. And from a very practical standpoint, people do stuff that feels good. People don't do stuff that doesn't feel good. If we're trying to end prisons and it sucks, if the whole work of doing it just feels like hot garbage, everyone is just gonna wanna watch TV. I love television. It doesn't let me down. I'm not crying. I mean, I am triggered sometimes, but and there's somebody, I was in this conversation on Facebook recently with someone I know a little bit, who's a disabled femme of color, and she was just kind of like, why would anyone even do transformative justice? What's the point? And people were like bringing up different things, and then she was just like, I remember her saying something like, if I'm gonna do this, as a survivor who's already been through a lot, I want this to feel great. And I remember being like, that's why, no, there's no way. It feels like hot garbage. It feels like a disaster. It's really hard. It's like doing the hardest shit imaginable. It's your friend rapes your other friend and you gotta fix it and you're really tired. But then I was like, but everything can be different. So what if we actually were like, how do we make this stuff feel better? How do we make this stuff feel good? Beth talked last night about the immense joy that she gets from being in Black feminism and Black queer feminism. And that really made me remember something I've never forgotten, which is that intersectional Black and brown queer disabled feminism, or whatever part of that you identify with, it's fucking fun. It's really fun to fuck shit up with people who are like you, and you don't have to have this miserable life that was handed to you. You can have another one, and sometimes it's miserable too, but then you can change it. And you don't have to have a bunch of bullshit that doesn't work for you. I had no swearing in this, but I guess it just popped up. Yeah, so I want us to, and I want to say these are thoughts I have, and I'm not posing them as the answers or me as the expert. I'm throwing these out there as ideas and questions and things I'm not sure about and wild experiments. And I am wondering if we can move towards pleasure in these things, and to really move towards what actually feels good. I'm sure we need to have revolutionary discipline, but what can also make this feel sweet? What's the sweetness that compels us? What's the sweetness that keeps feeding us? And I'm going to say just a couple more things, then I'm going to close out. I think that we need to build scale and systems that actually support the enormity of this work. I think that we have to stop expecting that someone reads one article and knows how to fix it, because that is really unfair. I think that we need to support each other. I think that we need to be patient. I think that we need to learn from our mistakes. I think that this is work that is all about feelings, and that when we ignore that at our peril, and that feelings are complicated, and that one thing that's complicated that I've seen a lot and I've talked with friends about, including some folks who are in this room, is, lately sometimes in some situations or discussions, I've seen people be like, we are against disposability, we're against the prison industrial complex, we can't throw anyone away. And love that, believe in that, but sometimes it is weaponized against survivors who are really mad at the people who've harmed them. And I've seen survivors, particularly Black and brown femme survivors, but also other genders and races of survivors, be told, don't be angry, don't be mean, don't expect any consequences, this is just all love and light and a big rainbow gathering or some shit. Okay, fuck the rainbow gathering. Anyway, really. And I want to say, I mean, I had a fight with someone who was just like, you're carceral feminism because you disagree with me. And I just was like, me having a boundary is not me being the prison industrial complex. I am one 43-year-old femme eating some Cheetos. Like, I do not have the power to lock you up just because I'm like, I disagree with that opinion. It is really, these processes that we're inventing, I know I just talked about pleasure, and I want to also complicate it and say it doesn't always have to feel good. I've been in processes that worked, and I was like, at the end of the day, I'm like, okay, cool, person who caused harm, you did all the things on the checklist, I actually think you're changing. That's great. I'm not going to be your best friend. And I don't have to be. I don't have to throw you away. I don't have to exile you to Jerk Island, which is a place I think about sometimes when I'm really tired, where I'm just like, just put them all on Jerk Island, and just let them work it out, and then I could just drop The Rock in there and he could mediate somehow. These are just, The Rock, okay, if Walking Tall is arguably a transformative justice narrative. He comes home and the mill's shut down and he gets that 2x4 and he beats up that guy. Anyway, that's a whole other story. I see you, Corey. But where's it? Oh, yeah, The Rock. Hold on, bringing it back. We actually get to be mad. We actually need to be able to allow survivors to feel whatever way we feel, including angry. When you tell Black and brown femmes especially that we have to be nice about being survivors, that's bullshit. Actually, anger is Audre Lorde said, anger is a powerful emotion. It tells you when something's wrong. And we are mostly told that we are not supposed to be angry, and many of us are very depressed, including suicidal, because depression is anger turned inside out. Right? That anger is a powerful force. And yes, sometimes I've had to talk to people where they're like, I'm going to be like The Rock. I'm going to get a 2x4 and go beat up so-and-so. And I have to be like, okay, so that is a choice and things might happen. So let's actually, do you want to just go break some bottles on the railroad tracks first and see if you feel better before we potentially get the cops called on us, I've been that person, who has had to go break some bottles on the rocks. You have to go into this knowing that you will get triggered, you will get frozen, you will get angry, you will feel deep grief for the ways in which your own survivorhood comes up. And the processes that we're in have to create spaces that hold that. And this is the next to last thing I'm going to say. I think that, we all have different relationships to spirituality, but I think always about what is the power that we have, whether it's dreaming, whether it's ancestors, whether it's spirit. And I think a lot about how in a lot of our cultures, back in the day when people were warriors and went into battle, that was a temporary space. And when they came back, there'd be ceremonies to welcome them back, And those ceremonies would be like, okay, great, you're gonna take off your armor now and you're gonna cleanse and you're gonna cry and you're gonna be held and you're gonna lay it down and you're gonna heal. I think that as we continue to build this work, we need to build those ceremonies in. I think that we could pray, being like, we could use everything we got. The next time I do a TA process, I'm gonna be like, dear gods of transformation, please help this person figure it the fuck out. I'm gonna ask for protection. I'm gonna ask for strength. I'm gonna take a lot of baths with salt water in them and, do that cleansing so that I can let those stories, because I can hear a lot of really intense shit and be like, and then there's a bit where I go, okay, and now I'm really, and I need to not be surprised by that, and we need to not be surprised by that as we do this work. I think about what going to the ocean together would look like after or during different processes and holding each other and feeding each other and giving each other healing and giving ourselves healing when we're alone. I think about that a lot. I think about those as weapons that we have as at our disposal. And yeah, is that it? That might be it. Wait, I said my quote first, but I'm gonna just see if I left anything else. And I think that one thing that holds me at the many times in my life where I've just been like, I don't know how to go forward into this, I don't know how to survive this, is actually the relationship I have with different oceans. And when I've had I lived in Toronto for 10, 11 years, so, we got the Great Lakes, which is different. People were like, it's an ocean. I'm like, it's a lake. Sorry, nice try, guys. But, the 7 years I lived in Oakland, I would go to the ocean a lot, and every time I reached that ocean, I was just struck by the wild immensity of everything that's in that water. And I was really struck by the wild immensity of everything we don't know yet. And, Walida and Marisha also has this amazing quote where she said, our ancestors literally dreamed us into existence. Like, they broke time and space to make us happen. And some folks may have heard her talk about, she's like, yeah, all of us, for her as someone who is a Black historian who also writes science fiction, which was what she calls visionary fiction, she's like, look, a world without prisons, we don't know what it is, but we can dream it. She's like, 4 generations ago, my ancestors did not know what a world without slavery would look like, but they dreamed that up. She's like, they dreamed me up. All of our ancestors, living, dead, the ones we know, the ones we don't know, they literally had some wild, crazy ideas, and they made us happen. And we get to do that too, and we get to not be perfect or have it all figured out, but we get to have that wild dreaming. So I really wish us all luck in this wild imaginings of imagining the future that is what we deserve and what the people who are going to be ancestors someday, who are our kids and the people who come after us, get to have. And thank you so much for witnessing and listening to me and for being present today. Oh, thank you. I probably forgot some stuff, but thank you for listening for an hour and 15 minutes. You probably need to pee, and you should go pee if you need to. And please do pee and come back if you can, or if you need to step out. But yeah, I think we're gonna have an opportunity where if people are like, I've got a question, I've got a thought, I've got a comment, we have a chance to have a conversation now that's interactive. So yeah, what people have. I never can think of anything, so I'm always just like, that was great, I don't know. Yeah, there's a purple and blue scarf person up there.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you
You're welcome.
for your talk. It was really wonderful. So you talked about resisting through beauty and aesthetic, and also resisting joyfully. And I was wondering if you could maybe expand on that with some examples.
Could you say it again? I heard you say resisting through something and then resisting through something else, and I didn't hear what the somethings were.
Oh, okay. Aesthetics and beauty, and then also like joyful and pleasurable resistance.
Yeah. Totally. I think that if all we do is grind ourselves into the dust, we're not going to win. We're just going to kind of like fall into a pile of dust one day. And I think that often in gender violence, movements and organizing, it's just the most burnout stuff. And a lot of people leave after 10 years to go be massage therapists because they can't do it anymore. And, I've known a lot of people who are just like, I do nails now and I don't want to hear your rape story. Thank you. The end. So I really think a lot about, and I think a lot of that comes, like most people I know who do, sexual, gender violence, partner abuse stuff, we don't come to it because we're like, oh, that sounds like fun. We all come to it because we're survivors and we want to save people the way we wish we'd been saved, or help people the way, we got help, or we wish we'd had help. So, I'm a workaholic and I have a weird idea of what fun is, and it really took till a couple years ago where I was like, oh, wow, I could go on vacation and not just have the vacation be, I listened to everyone's crisis stories for 7 days. So, it's stuff like, as survivors, I think it's a real complicated thing to be like, what is a life that has pleasure in it? What is a life that, I just have people over for dinner, I do the stuff that I love, I craft, I make art, I walk in the woods. I'm not just rushing from crisis to crisis. And, I also honor that, rushing from crisis to crisis is how I've saved my life. And, there is so much crisis all the time. And we are in these places of scarcity where it feels like if we don't do it, who will? And there's always some, and as a survivor for years, and I still do this, I would get these 3 a.m. phone calls and messages and I'd be like, shit, yeah, I'll always write you back. It doesn't matter how tired I am. Like, I remember being so alone, when I was in that abusive relationship in the 90s. There was no like crowdfunding. There was no, let me bring you a basket of food. Like, I had a crisis line, and sometimes the crisis line would be like, we already talked to you a couple times. We got to call we got to talk to somebody else. Like, so I was always like, I know what it's like to be isolated, and I'm going to give myself something by rushing towards people. But there's a point where that became everything I did. I was just hyper accessible all the time. It was just, I was the crisis line for everybody. And I didn't really have a life where it was okay for me to just like hang out with my friends, hang out with my partner, like go see some music, like do something dumb and fun, like hang out in water. And I think that, there's a lot of movement stuff where it's just like, no, you just get your joy in the struggle, and that's all you get your joy. And I think that it's important for the struggle to be joyful, but I also think it's important for our lives to be joyful. And I don't think it has to be a binary. And something, my friend Yashna Padamse wrote this really amazing article called, God, I want to call it Stop Talking About Self-Care, but that's in it. That's not the title, but it's like Collectives of Care, Movements of Liberation, where she's like, yeah, like, she actually is talking about, she's like, yeah, you know, when a lot of people talk about self-care, you know, it's seen as like this individual thing you're supposed to do and like one more task on the list. You know, after you do your 60 hours of work, you got to go get that bath bomb and make sure to do your self-care. And, you know, or you have to go on some expensive yoga retreat that's stupid and that nobody has the money for, the time for. And so she was talking about, like, you know, she works at the National Domestic Workers Alliance now, and she's like, yeah, so for us, it's more about having a place where people are organizing, you know, buying for domestic workers' rights. But she's like, yeah, everyone brings their kids to work, and we have food, and we really ask each other how we're doing, and we listen, and, you know, that's not just some stuff that you take care of on your own time. Like, we actually really care for each other, and we love each other, and that's how we're able to pull off this really hard shit that we do. So I think that's part of it. I think that, you know, honestly, I want to challenge us to be creative. I don't have the answers yet, but I'm just like, can we have some TJ shit that's fun for once instead of just like grim despair and sitting in a circle while everyone, you know, like can we maybe experiment with trying to figure out a way that this feels good, where we could, even if it's just reminding ourselves, like, we're actually changing the world and we're actually, you know, transforming abuse, and that's beautiful. And we need to give ourselves recognition because most of the world, Time magazine is not going to necessarily give us recognition for this. And then in terms of aesthetics as resistance, I mean, I just think that, like, you know, a lot of queer femmes, a lot of femme and feminine people and other genders of people, we survive through making ourselves beautiful on our own terms. You know, I mean, my mom is a working class, white and Roma woman. She bought one bottle of Chanel No. 5 every 5 years, and she made that shit last, one drop every day. You know, my mom's a polio survivor. She works 3 jobs. Like, and I just remember her being like, this is what holds me together, right? And I just think, like, especially for a lot of queer femmes I know, like, we curate, and I'm just going to speak because this is like the gender universe that I'm a part of, so I know the most about it, but I would say that, you know, for a lot of queer femmes I know, we invent our genders as ways that, like, liberate us and make us feel wonderful and make us feel protected, you know, and make us feel really powerful in a world that really hates femininity, right? And so I think about that. I think about a story that Raina Gossett, who's a Black trans filmmaker and organizer, that she shared, that I heard, where she was like, you know, Marsha P. Johnson, who's, you know, known as the Black trans woman who threw the first brick at Stonewall and who organized street transvestite activist revolutionaries, you know, did all this stuff and did it while a lot of the time she was homeless. You know, she was struggling with a lot of mental health crisis. Raina's like, when Marsha was living on the piers, you know, in a community of homeless trans folks of color, she's like, yeah, she wove a fresh crown of flowers for her head every day, you know? And she walked through the world with that beauty, being like, you can't fuck with me, like, I'm beautiful. Yeah, you're still gonna fuck with me, but I'm giving myself that divinity and that beauty. I'm giving myself that gift. And I just think that's a weapon we have, that we can give ourselves that as we are doing this work as a way of restoration. And it doesn't have to be this thing that's seen as this, like, that femphobia would say is this little trivial thing we do on the side. You know, I think it's something that actually is like this is something that gives us life and keeps us alive. Yeah. Did I answer your question? Okay, cool. Great. I'm always worried. I see a hand in the middle in the blue shirt, and I'm really bad at seeing hands also, so wave them around if you got them, when you got them.
Doing this advocacy for 20 years, I'm wondering how your view of transformative justice has changed. Did you have any major shifts?
Oh, yeah. Well, you know, I know that it seems like we're still in hell, and we kind of are, but, you know, 20 years ago, I literally was told by my comrades in, you know, prison justice and anti-police brutality work, when I was like, my partner's hitting me, they're like, well, you're a strong woman of color, you can take it. And where they also were like, well, he's an oppressed man of color, you know, and we both were non-binary, but this is how the lens they saw it. And they're like, well, you know, you can't really, you know what, like, he's been through so much, like, let's just work it out. I'm not saying we're out of the park, but 20 years later, that has changed a lot. And I would say 20 years ago, me being like, my partner's hitting me, everyone was like, what? Because we really had this thing of like, activists don't do this. That's the cops, that's the man, you know? And I would say in my experience now, I see a lot more people being like, no, like abusers or anyone can harm, anyone can be harmed. People can be abusive in all kinds of communities. And I see a lot more people, you know, and I know there's a lot of people who are like, I'm scared to talk. I'm not ready to tell my story. I'm really scared. But I do see a lot more people being a little bit easier at breaking silence and being like, this thing happened and somebody has to do something about it. You know, 20 years ago, I think that like, I just was like, I don't believe in prisons and I believe anyone can change. Besides that, I'm not sure, but I'd like to not feel afraid. And that's kind of what I had. And now I see different stories from people who are like, who've also been in it sometimes for a long time, where they're like, yeah, you know, I remember hearing a story where someone, she was talking about how maybe 10 years ago being sexually harassed at her place of work, you know, by an older man, and then finding an ally in her organization who confronted him, and the guy gets let go. And then he pops back up 10 years later. But she's like, in the meantime, there'd been a lot of organizing within her community, like a lot of teach-ins, a lot of policy setting, being like, okay, we actually have a sexual harassment policy now. We actually have rules that you can't, if you're in leadership in this organization, you can't have sex with the young people. Like, actually, this is what consent is. Like, let's do some education. We have policies if stuff comes up. Where when this person popped back up, numbers of groups were able to say to him, hey, we know that you're part of this community that we're all a part of. We're not throwing you away, but we believe this person and the other survivors, and we're not going to work with you until you actually admit what happened and really like answer the things they're asking you to do, which are pretty straightforward. I think that, and that's still rare, but I think that that's a really important model because it shows the building to scale, where if we do lots and lots of like, and it's not always like big interventions, like it's policy work. It's like, okay, so I have a queer land community. If someone shows up and someone goes, hey, that person raped so-and-so, what's the policy that I have? Like, what do I do at that moment? Like, what's the stuff that I got in the 3-ring binder? You know, how do I talk to the survivor? How do I talk to the perpetrator? Like, how do I do it? There's a lot more stuff that's out there. It's just not always easy to find. But there's been that 20 years of thinking and building, and we can build on it some more. I don't know if this is my thinking, but I think, and I gotta say, Portland, you know, I don't know if this is still true, but 5 years ago, I remember being like, this is a rough city for TJ. I knew a lot of people here and in other places who kind of hit a wall a little while ago, where they were just like, I hate prisons, but I also hate transformative justice. Fuck it, you know, like maybe we should go back to girl gangs. And we're really frustrated with these models of like sitting in a healing circle and everyone goes around and says, this is what you did and it's wrong. And then the person, you know, people were just like, I don't know, I'm really kind of over that. And there's been some moments where I've actually felt a lot of people having some despair around it. We don't know if this is gonna work. You know, this is just too burnout city. And then different waves happen where, for example, if you go to transformharm@tumblr.com, that's BYP 100, which is a Movement for Black Lives group in Chicago. They're very well documented public accounting of what happened when somebody sexually assaulted someone in that organization, and they went through a process that worked. You know, I see a lot more like that stuff popping up where I'm like, something worked and it's documented and it doesn't always look the way that maybe I thought it would look. And I don't know everybody who's doing it. I guess I would say that I just really thought we'd go real hard until we'd fix stuff, and now as an older disabled person, I'm just like, I actually believe I am more in the space now, post 40, where I'm like, I will take time off, I will turn my phone off, and where we're being in it for the long haul means really practicing sustainability, and everyone likes the word sustainability and nobody really likes it. Nobody really knows how to do it. They're just like, no, we want results in 3 weeks. So actually being like, no, we're gonna be on this slow ass time and it's gonna take longer than we thought, but it actually might work better. It's something that I more have in my body as something I've experienced and that I'm comfortable with. Yeah, great question, thank you. Anybody else? Yeah, person with their hand up right there.
Can you talk a little bit about how your transformative justice organizing aligns with your performance with Mangoes with Chili and Sin's Invalid?
Oh, I don't know. I just do a lot of stuff. That's a good question. I mean, oh God, can I come back to that? I don't know if I know the answer, and it's a really important question, but I think that, well, Mangoes has ended, and Sins is an ongoing project, and I think that disability justice is spreading out now where I think there was a period where people were like, it's Sins and that's it, and now I'm just like, no, there's Harriet Tubman Collective, there's like Deaf Poets Society, there's a lot of different growing like little micro communities of people doing disability justice. And I think, one thing is that I think that, a value that I see in a lot of disability justice communities or groups like groups of disabled people is that we have been thrown away so much that we really are patient with each other sometimes. Not always, but sometimes we cut each other a lot of slack and we're like, okay, you said the wrong word, that's cool. You probably were phasic today. Like, let's just try it again. So I guess I think that I see that as also an interchange or connection between disability justice and transformative justice is a lot of times as disabled people, we have been thrown away so much and we've been thrown away for being imperfect that I think that sometimes we're able to be like, okay, low and slow, like let's just like really hang in there and try and make this work. I still think that like, unfortunately, for the most part, when we talk about disability justice, it's disabled people who care about us, and non-disabled people are still just like, what? And they might tack ableism onto the list, but they're not really paying attention to disabled scholarship or thinking or organizing or strategy. They have no idea that we exist as communities. Like they're just still like the handicapped are trying to empower themselves, and they don't know that we have all these like very active Facebook groups and discussions and fights and like collectives and like all that stuff, and that they actually have something that they could learn from us. And like that's just really, really fucking hard to get able people to get. And you can say so many times, it's like, y'all are gonna be disabled at some point. If you live long enough, you are gonna be sick and disabled, and you can learn from us how to live a really awesome life within that. And you can learn a lot of skills around asking for help, which is the $6 million hard thing to do, which is a very transformative justice skill. I think that when I meet a lot of people who are newly disabled or chronically ill, they're just like, oh my God, I need help and I hate myself. Like I need to be a strong, independent person who fends for themselves. And in some disabled communities, we have some incredible sophistication around giving and receiving help. And it's not like, oh yeah, I have no shame. Of course, I'm still wrestling with internalized ableism and shame. And, I still have times when I'm in a flare where I'm like, really need someone to do my laundry, really gonna have a hard time asking to do that. But there's more practice with the economies of giving and receiving help in disability communities and what feels right and how to do it in a way where you don't give up your autonomy, where it's not like you ask for help and you've got to say thank you all the time and be real grateful and just accept what everyone says. And I think that those are skills that could really help out in transformative justice. God knows we need some fucking help. And God knows, I think a lot of times in TJ, it is like a small number of people who are trying to do everything. And then you got people who are like, I want to be part of this, but like I see you all doing everything and I can't. I have 15 minutes a week. So I think with disability justice, in a lot of disability communities, we get really good at being like, hey, I'm really tired, I'm really sick, my multiple sclerosis is real bad this week, but I can do 15 minutes on this task, and that's something, and that means something. And I think that we'd be a lot more successful as people trying to replace the prison industrial complex if we're like, you don't need to be this like, warrior goddess, going full on into this big process and ending prisons. You can pick up the stuff from the supermarket and bring it to the meeting. You can listen for 20 minutes. You can do this one thing. That's part of it. And I think like, okay, maybe I should stop talking because maybe there's another question, but I do want to say really briefly that I think that one thing that SINS gets asked a lot is they're like, okay, so and SINS Invalid is this like disabled, queer, and or people of color performance troupe. And when we started off, we did a lot of performance about disabled people and sex, which was a real conversation closer for a lot of people. I could be like, I'm in this disabled sex troupe. And everyone would be like, wow. That's nice. I don't know what to say. And, yeah. And then some people would be like, oh, you got enough material for a whole hour? Wow. And I'm like, wow, some people's children. Okay. Yeah. But, Patty Byrne, who's one of the co-founders of SINS, she had something really, because I asked her one time, I was like, so why did you decide performance art will be the way to change ableism? This might seem weird to some people. And she kind of laughed under her breath and she's like, I tell the story a lot. She's like, I could do workshops for like able-bodied people of color, trying to convince them that disabled people exist and we matter and ableism matters. Or I could try and like talk to white disabled people and try and be like, hey, stop saying we're the last acceptable oppression and like stop being really racist. And she's like, I've done that. It's really a waste of time and energy a lot of the time. And she's like, or what I could do that's a lot more efficient is I could make a 3-minute piece of performance that just gets into someone's dreams and nightmares around disability and racism and oppression and just fucks their shit up and transforms them. And she didn't say this, but I think that for a lot of us who are disabled people who have limited energy and time, we're always looking for what's the most spoons efficient, and spoons, that's slang for how much energy you have in the day. Like maybe you do one load of laundry and that's it. So I think performance can really get in people's heads and their dreams and nightmares and transform things. And I wonder about that as also something, one of the many tools we could use to do transformative justice stuff where we're like, and I've seen people do that where they just do role play stuff around like you're dancing in the club and you're a traumatized queer person. So maybe you have a couple drinks because you're trying to feel your body and then you're grinding on somebody and someone goes, I'm frozen and I don't know how to say no. And we're all supposed to be cool queers in the club, right? That kind of, I've seen people do, I wouldn't necessarily use performance art, but like role play and like, people's theater, to like do education about this is what it looks like in real life. And like, this is what it can be to be like, hey, friend, like, how about you call me tomorrow? Or hey, I actually don't want that. Because so much of what happens around abuse happens behind closed doors and in private. So I think actually having performance that brings stuff out in public, and that's like a story, it's not something that's actually happening in real time, could be really useful. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, there's a hand right over there, and that's the only hand I see. But yeah, that one.
I was wondering if you had any thoughts on what transformative justice would look like within the mental health field.
Within the mental health what?
Field.
Oh, wow. So much. Well, people wouldn't get raped in nursing homes and psychiatric institutions by staff. And people would not be in 4-point restraints. And, a whole lot of coercive stuff wouldn't happen. And that's that's part of it. I mean, I was actually talking about this with some folks yesterday, is that and I think this is a struggle to my just brand new knowledge that's happening in Portland right now. And it's also happening other places around, police as first responders to mental health crisis, right? And, in Seattle where I live now, last year, Charlene Lyles, who's a Black mother of 5 kids who had, psychiatric disabilities, was shot by the police when she actually called them to be like, hey, I think someone's breaking into my house. Right? And Renee Damas, who is a member of the Muckleshoot Nation, was also killed by the police when they showed up on a wellness check because her boyfriend thought she was suicidal. So I actually think that at the bare beginning, TJ would mean that people who are psychiatrized are not killed by the police. And I think that and it also means that, and I think, and we were talking about this, and there's people in the room who actually are doing organizing around this with Critical Resistance and other groups. I think that we should give money to and support and stuff, by the way, yeah. I think that, often when, this is something I forgot to say. So over 50% of Black, Indigenous people of color who are killed by police are also disabled in some way, where there's physical disabilities, autism, being deaf, being mentally ill, or all of the above, right? And, they are often killed at this intersection of racism and ableism and somebody with a gun, right? And so every time something like that happens, one of the things that I see being called for a lot is instead of cops, we should have psychiatrists go. And, that's a real mixed bag because, a lot of people who have psych disabilities are like, I don't want someone to show up with a needle with 2 weeks of Depakote either. Thank you very much. I want something else. I actually think that in terms of TJ within mental health world, that is an actual huge project to create. And every time there's a mass shooting, it's we've got to do better with mental health. And then it's but the mental health that's out there is terrible. So it doesn't mean more of the same. It means actually, I think some short-term things could be more voluntary crisis respite houses where people can go voluntarily, where you're not locked up, you're not formed, where you're just I am in a psychically altered state and I need to be with people and I need someone to make me food and sit with me. I think more of those spaces, which there's one in every city maybe, and they're completely overwhelmed, would be really helpful. I think more de-escalation. I think more of a huge number. I think it's more of everything more of the time. I want people who want pills to be able to get pills more easily, and not just, you go to the emergency ward when you're having a mental health crisis and you get stabilized barely, and then you get bad medication, and then you get sent off on your own. I want people to be able to access individual therapy that's not $140. And it's not you wait, a year for 6 weeks with an intern. I want all of those things, and I want force to be taken out of mental health. And I want, I think a lot of times when we're talking about mental health, there'll be people who are like, well, we just need herbal tea. And then some people are like, no, I really also need Ativan. And then I'm like, I think we need herbal tea and Ativan and justice and meditation and vacation and health insurance. And, and there's times where people are in crisis where they're like, no, I really do need that, intense antipsychotic, Western med. And there's times where people are like, I need to go see my grandma and be back on my land, or both. But I think that all of that and taking force out of it and de-weaponizing, police and, arms being inside psychiatry is really, really important. And also asking people who have psych disabilities what we need, because we're also not asked that. And we've been saying it for a really long time, a really long time. More peer support, more places where we can be in community that are not, in the basement of a church with a weird, person facilitating some kind of weird game. I think also, sorry, I could really go on about this clearly, but this is a separate thing from the speech. I've been working on this piece about what it means to be an abuse survivor who's living a good life but who's not fixed, and about how when I was a young survivor, the role models I was really given was either, you heal and then you're fixed and you're kind of like a nice lady with a nice life and you never get triggered again and you're never sad and it's all good. Yeah, good, cool story, right? Or, you're still triggered at 42 and you're a failure at being a survivor. I really could have used seeing some stories where it's my healing doesn't have to be as a survivor to just have it be sewn up like a cut and I live a really normal life. And I'm not failing if I'm still grieving my mom, at 43, or if I love my partner and I live with them and they're amazing and I still get triggered, or I'm just like, what just happened? I need more role models of survivorhood and about being crazy, that's not about that being a failed state. And I also need systemic change within our movements, our communities, or what have you, where you can be a leader and be nuts and you don't have to lie about it. Because actually having to lie about psychiatric disabilities makes them feel worse. I literally made up, I was just like, oh yeah, I was in a small car accident, that's why I can't be on this conference call. I'm fine. I just had a panic attack for 24 hours and I couldn't tell my work that was happening because I wouldn't look like, a good, responsible worker. So I made up being in a minor car accident to get away with it. And that's funny, sort of, but it's also so many of us feel a lot of if we're going to be in leadership and respected, we have to manage our panic attacks, our crisis. We're not allowed to take 2 months off to be crazy. That's not in the employee manual. And I think that actually making collective changes and policy changes where it's okay to have psych disabilities and there's room for that. And that's the whole thing where the ADA says that you have to provide reasonable accommodation. And as people with psych disabilities, we're often not reasonable. So I want some unreasonable accommodations. Yeah, thank you for that question. Are we running out of time? How are we doing? One more? That's the finger? Okay.
Yeah, maybe one more.
One more, okay. Oh. Yeah. They're like, I gotta go.
Thank you. I think your struggle is really laudable. What do you think that can be some of the ways that we can reform the mainstream criminal justice system to make it serve the goals of the transformative justice? Is it even possible?
Yeah, I don't think it's possible. And I'm going to complicate that because I understand, and I will, my friend Ajaris often says, she's like, yeah, I've been called out by people because in different, she's like, yeah, I've worked with mothers of young men of color who are queer who've been killed by the police or by strangers, where the mothers were like, I want to go through the system. And I've had people be like, why are you supporting them? That's not transformative justice. And she's like, I'm going to support Black mothers in what they want to do, we're all figuring it out. I understand, I believe in supporting people as we navigate the system. I believe in putting pressure on the system, right? I believe in holding the system accountable. I believe in, I think that like one thing that we can do is we can support people who are inside, survivors who are inside. We can do organizing around survivors who are criminalized for fighting back and who get put in prison, like Brescia Meadows, like lots of Marissa Alexander, lots of other Black and Indigenous and brown women who've been locked up for defending themselves. I think that that's the TJ work that we need to do, is we need to make sure they come home and that they survive prison. I think that we can support people inside prisons who are organizing survivor support and like aids and healing and spiritual stuff within the prisons to survive. I think that's really important. And I think that we need to put pressure on the system and hold it accountable when it screws up, which is, it does on purpose all the time. But reform is tricky. The things that I've seen that I'm like, that works is, I'm thinking about my friend who works at the teen court in Arcata, California in Humboldt County. And she, is still a prison justice organizer. She worked supporting prisoners in Pelican Bay State Penitentiary against solitary confinement for years. And then she's in this program that diverts young people who've been picked up out of going into juvie. And actually, and it's, and so it's basically, there's a bunch of different tribal nations that are up there who are involved, and also non-native folks are involved. And it's basically like, okay, instead of sending kids to jail, let's figure out a way that they can, restore damages or repair harm or like sit in a circle or something like that. And that's great. I'm into that. Like anything that keeps like young Black and brown people out of jail, hell yes, aces, that is great. But I think it's a stopgap, and I hate to be cynical, but I think that when you look at the criminal legal system, it's founded on laws like the Fugitive Slave Act and the Indian Act. Like it's founded on locking up Black and brown people when we get out of line. And I don't think that the cops in the prisons are going to give that up. And I think it gets really dangerous when we do, because in Canada, for example, after the suicides I mentioned, P4W, the prison for women, was shut down, right? And then, there's all of this criticism, there's all this kind of like Canadian multiculturalism and like liberalism and et cetera. And so they're like, oh, we're gonna do this like gender sensitive prisons, and it's gonna have like gender sensitive units for trans prisoners. Isn't that wonderful? And there's gonna be an area of the prison where First Nations people can smudge, and that's culturally respectful. I don't want a culturally respectful prison. I don't want a gender-sensitive prison. I don't want people to go to prison. And as a disabled person with limited spoons, like I want to fight for accountability. I want to push for changes. I want to push for, I'm into things like let's get it so you could still have, like visitation where you can touch your kids, where you can like nurse your kids, where you can see your lover and your partner, where you can finish a college degree inside, like things like that. But the actual system, I don't think, can be reformed and made better. I think that when you're locking people up, you're locking people up. And I have a lot of unanswered questions about what do you do with people who harm multiple times, and I'm still asking those questions. And I do think that, as Angela Davis and a lot of people have said, because people are always like, okay, so what about the serial rapist? And I'm just like, yeah, absolutely. And it's important to note the mass majority of people who are in prison are people who are like, I sold, a kilo of pot. I was there when my boyfriend sold a kilo of pot. Things like that where, and then people here already know this, but like most people who've done irreparable amounts of harm never see time. So it's also about who's causing harm, who's outside prisons, and how do we address those? Because most people who rape are not locked up, but they're still out there having sexually assaulted. So what do we do within community to hold them accountable and try and get some reparations or restitutions to their survivors? That's what I think. Yeah. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. I think that's...
Are we going to wrap it up?
Yeah, we're wrapping it up. So you can visit the bookstore table outside where a bunch of Leah's books will be for sale.
Okay, cool.
Thank
Can we just clap
you.
for all the organizers and everyone one more time? Yay. Wow, that's 2 hours. I also, before we cut it off, it's not up there right now, but I usually do this thing where I collect everyone's email addresses and then I don't email anyone the resources for like 3 months. But I am going, if my website is brownstargirl.org, and very soon if you go there, there's going to be a list of different transformative justice curriculums and resources and things to check out. So please do check that out if you remember. Thank you so much. Yeah, brownstargirl.org is my website, and I also am the only Piepzna-Samarasinha in the universe, so you just Google my name, it will come up. Thank you.